Clara Mitchell never imagined that her life would change so drastically, especially not in a way that would slowly steal her strength and spirit. For months, she had noticed something was wrong, but she chalked it up to fatigue, the natural wear and tear of a woman who had always given more than she had. Yet, when the diagnosis came, it hit like a freight train, shattering everything she had ever believed about her body and herself. Clara, at 43, was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, a rare and serious form of blood cancer. At first, it was just fatigue that she couldn't shake, a low-level exhaustion that left her feeling drained after the smallest tasks. But as weeks turned into months, her condition worsened. Clara, who had always been the epitome of energy and grace, found herself unable to get out of bed some days. She couldn't concentrate, she lost weight unexpectedly, and her skin grew pale. It wasn't until a visit to her doctor, after weeks of dismissing her symptoms, that the truth was revealed. The blood tests confirmed it: chronic myelogenous leukemia. It was a cruel blow, one that Clara hadn't been prepared for. There was no easy way to hear those words. Chronic myelogenous leukemia was a silent killer, often diagnosed in its later stages, and Clara was among the unlucky few. The idea that her body, which had always been a source of pride, was now attacking itself was more than Clara could bear. In the weeks following her diagnosis, Clara was consumed by a wave of emotions that she couldn't even begin to sort out. There was the shock, the disbelief, and the overwhelming grief of knowing her body was no longer hers to control. But there was also something else, a deep, gnawing fear that Clara couldn't shake. The fear of death. The fear of what was to come. The fear of leaving her family behind before she had truly lived. As her physical health deteriorated, so did her mental state. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror without seeing a stranger staring back. The woman she had always known, the woman who took care of everything and everyone, was fading away, and in her place was a woman filled with doubt, anxiety, and despair. Clara's refusal to comb her hair began as a small act of defiance, one that no one noticed at first. It seemed harmless enough, a mere inconvenience to her otherwise perfect routine. But soon, as her physical condition worsened, the refusal to tend to her hair became a larger symbol of her rejection of the life she had once known. Her hair, once meticulously styled every morning, became a tangled, unruly mess that reflected the state of her mind and body. She couldn't find the energy to care for it. She couldn't find the energy to care for herself. For the first time in her life, Clara felt utterly powerless, and her hair, once her pride, became a symbol of that powerlessness. The hairbrush sat unused on the bathroom counter, and Clara avoided the mirror like it was a reminder of her own mortality. Her daughter, Sophie, was the first to notice. "Mom, why don't you comb your hair anymore?" she asked one afternoon, her voice tinged with concern. Sophie had always been close to Clara, the one who looked up to her and sought her guidance in everything. But now, as she looked at her mother, Sophie saw a woman she didn't recognize, someone lost, someone who had stopped fighting. Clara, unable to face the truth, simply shook her head. "I'm just tired, Sophie," she muttered, brushing off the question. "It's nothing." But Sophie wasn't fooled. She had seen her mother struggle with something far deeper than mere exhaustion. The weight of her illness was heavy on Clara's shoulders, and Sophie could feel it, even if Clara wouldn't admit it. The woman who had always been strong, the woman who had always cared for everyone else, was now the one in need of care. And that frightened Sophie more than anything else. As the weeks passed, Clara's isolation grew. She stopped seeing friends, avoided phone calls, and made excuses to keep her family at arm's length. She had always been the center of attention, the one everyone could rely on, but now she was invisible, hiding in plain sight. It wasn't that she didn't love her family, it was that she couldn't bear for them to see her in this state. She was terrified that they would look at her and see only the illness, see the frailty, see the woman who was no longer in control. But it wasn't just Sophie who noticed the change. Ben, Clara's husband, did as well. He had been concerned, of course, but he didn't know what to say, didn't know how to approach the woman who had always been so strong. Ben had always been the practical one, the one who fixed problems, who solved crises. But this wasn't something he could fix. And that realization left him feeling helpless. He tried to talk to Clara, tried to encourage her to seek treatment, to take care of herself, but every conversation ended in silence. Clara wasn't ready to confront her illness, wasn't ready to face the fact that her body was betraying her. It was easier to pretend it wasn't happening, easier to retreat into silence than to deal with the terrifying reality of her diagnosis. But in her heart, Clara knew that silence wasn't the answer. It was just the only way she knew how to cope. As the days dragged on, Clara's health continued to decline. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The fatigue, the pain, the constant weakness, they were all too real, too overwhelming. Yet even as the disease ravaged her body, Clara continued to avoid the reality of it. She stayed in bed longer, skipped doctor's appointments, and refused to talk about her diagnosis. She refused to admit the gravity of her situation. Her physical appearance began to reflect her emotional turmoil. Clara had always been a woman who took pride in how she looked, who groomed herself with precision. But now her hair was a tangled mass, and her clothes were often rumpled and disheveled. She had stopped looking at herself, stopped caring about the person she saw in the mirror. And with each passing day, her sense of self eroded further. But the disease wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Chronic myelogenous leukemia had become a metaphor for Clara's entire existence. Something she couldn't control, something she couldn't escape. She had always been the one who took charge, who made sure everything was in order. But now she was powerless. And for Clara, that realization was the most painful of all. The woman who had always been in control of her life was now struggling to maintain any semblance of normalcy. And it was this struggle, this silent rebellion against the reality of her diagnosis, that led to her refusal to comb her hair. It was her way of saying, "I can't do this anymore." It was her way of refusing to face the truth. But as Clara sat in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, she knew the time had come. She could no longer hide from the disease, from the pain, or from herself. It was time to face the truth, to acknowledge what was happening, and to take the first step toward healing. But that step would require more than just facing the illness. It would require Clara to face the woman she had become. Clara had always been a woman who thrived on control. She took pride in managing every aspect of her life, the household, her family, her career, and she did it all with grace and precision. She was the glue that held everything together, the one people turned to when they needed support. It was how she had defined herself for years: strong, organized, reliable. But the signs of her internal struggle had been there all along, buried beneath the surface of her carefully constructed life. Before the diagnosis of chronic myelogenous leukemia, Clara's life had seemed perfect, at least on the outside. She had a loving husband, Ben, and 2 children, Sophie and Thomas, who were growing up to be bright, promising young adults. Clara had built her world around her family. She devoted herself to ensuring their happiness and success, often putting her own needs last. The demands of being a mother and wife were endless, but Clara never complained. It was her role, her purpose, and she had embraced it fully. However, in the quiet moments when no one was looking, Clara began to notice the first subtle changes in her body. It started with fatigue. At first, she dismissed it as the natural result of being a mother to 2 children, managing a household, and working part-time as an event planner. But the fatigue lingered, stretching into weeks and then months. Clara's energy waned, and even the simplest tasks, like getting out of bed in the morning, became overwhelming. She chalked it up to stress, blaming it on the pressures of keeping up with her responsibilities. But then came the aches. A dull, persistent pain in her joints, particularly in her hands and knees, began to plague her. At first, it was only noticeable at night, but soon it became constant. She found herself struggling to climb stairs, to carry groceries, or to keep up with her children's activities. The pain felt like it was seeping into her bones, sapping her strength. Yet Clara pushed through it. She kept going, kept pretending that everything was fine because that's what she had always done. She was Clara Mitchell, the woman who could do it all. The next sign came when Clara lost weight, unexpectedly and without trying. Her clothes started to feel looser, and her reflection in the mirror began to look different. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just the result of stress, or perhaps a change in her diet. But as the months wore on, she couldn't deny that something was wrong. Her once healthy and vibrant body seemed to be fading away, and she felt more and more out of control. Still, she pushed on. It was easier to keep moving, to avoid thinking about what was happening inside her body. But the signs kept coming. She began to experience night sweats, soaking the sheets in the middle of the night, waking up feeling clammy and exhausted. Her skin lost its usual glow, and her face became pale, almost sallow. And yet, Clara continued to put on the mask. She would smile at her family, pretend to be the woman they needed her to be, while silently struggling to maintain her composure. The first time Clara went to the doctor was after Sophie had begged her to get checked out. Sophie had noticed how much thinner her mother was looking, how tired she seemed all the time. Clara had brushed off her concerns, but Sophie was persistent. "Mom, this isn't normal. Please just go to the doctor. Let them check you out. I'm worried about you." Clara had been reluctant. She didn't want to admit that something could be wrong, that her perfect world was slowly crumbling. But for Sophie's sake, she agreed to make an appointment. The doctor ran a series of tests, but it wasn't until the results came back that Clara understood the full scope of her condition. The blood tests revealed abnormal white blood cell counts, and after more tests, it was confirmed. Clara had chronic myelogenous leukemia. It was a rare, chronic form of leukemia, a blood cancer that often went undiagnosed until it had progressed to an advanced stage. The diagnosis was devastating. Clara's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. The doctor spoke in clinical terms, explaining the nature of the disease, the treatments available, and the long road ahead. But Clara couldn't hear him. The words seemed to blur, as if they were coming from a distance, far away. All she could think about was the word cancer, a word that terrified her, that seemed to rip away the sense of control she had so carefully cultivated over her life. For the first time, Clara's life felt out of her hands. The perfect woman who had always managed everything, who had always been in control, was now facing something she couldn't fight on her own. The realization hit her with force. She was sick and there was nothing she could do to change it. The illness, the disease, was bigger than her. It was the first time Clara felt powerless. The diagnosis shattered her in ways that words couldn't explain. She went home that night in a daze, her mind racing with questions and fears. What would this mean for her future? What would this mean for her family? For Sophie and Thomas? How long did she have? How much time had she lost already? The reality of her condition settled in over the next few days. Clara found herself battling a deep sense of fear that she had never experienced before. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Her body had betrayed her. The woman who had prided herself on being strong, independent, and healthy was now facing the fragility of her own existence. But the hardest part, Clara realized, was not just the diagnosis, it was the idea of losing control. She had always been the one people relied on. She had always been the one who had it all together. But now, as she stared at the reflection in the mirror, she saw someone she barely recognized. A woman who was no longer in charge, who was vulnerable, who could no longer hide her pain. And so, Clara did what many people do when faced with something they cannot control. She stopped caring about the things that used to matter. Her hair, once a point of pride, became the symbol of her rebellion against her illness. It was the one thing she could control, and so she stopped combing it. She allowed it to grow wild, unkempt, just like the feelings inside her that she couldn't express. Her refusal to comb her hair wasn't just an act of neglect. It was a statement. It was Clara's way of expressing her anger, her fear, her confusion. It was her silent protest against the disease that had invaded her body and stolen the life she had worked so hard to build. And for the first time, Clara felt a strange sense of power in her refusal. She might have been powerless against the disease, but at least she could control this small part of her life. She could control her appearance, the one thing that had always defined her strength. Clara had always been the one to hold everything together, her family, her home, her friends. She had been the pillar of strength in her own life, and the lives of those around her. But when chronic myelogenous leukemia made its presence known, everything she had worked so hard to build began to fall apart. It wasn't just her health that was affected. It was the very fabric of her relationships, the core of her identity. And as the disease took hold of her body, it took hold of the dynamics between her and those she loved, pushing them into unfamiliar territory. Her daughter, Sophie, had always looked up to her mother, admiring Clara for her unwavering strength and grace. But over the past several months, Sophie had begun to notice the changes in her mother. Clara was no longer the vibrant, energetic woman who took care of everything with ease. Instead, she had become a shell of herself, exhausted, withdrawn, and increasingly distant. At first, Sophie had tried to be understanding, telling herself that her mother was just going through a rough patch. But as the days turned into weeks and Clara's condition worsened, Sophie realized that this was more than just fatigue. Something was seriously wrong. It wasn't just Clara's refusal to comb her hair that caught Sophie's attention. It was the way her mother's eyes had grown dull, the way her smile no longer reached her eyes. Sophie knew something was happening, but Clara wouldn't talk about it. Every time Sophie tried to bring up the subject, Clara would deflect, offering weak excuses or changing the subject entirely. And that's when Sophie began to worry. She tried to approach Clara from a different angle, hoping that her mother would open up if given the right push. "Mom," Sophie said one evening, sitting beside her on the couch. "You've been acting really different lately. I'm not trying to pressure you, but you can talk to me. What's going on? I'm here for you." Clara's response was a strained smile, followed by a soft sigh. "I'm just tired, Sophie. It's nothing to worry about. I'm fine." Sophie knew that wasn't true, but she didn't know what else to say. She had always seen her mother as the strong one, the one who kept everyone else grounded. Seeing her so fragile, so defeated, was a painful reminder that Clara wasn't invincible. Sophie's heart ached as she watched the woman she loved slip further away. She wanted to help, to fix whatever was broken, but Clara wouldn't let her in. Sophie's frustration grew. She didn't know how to reach her mother anymore. She had always been able to talk to Clara, to share her worries, to seek guidance. But now Clara was a stranger, someone hiding behind walls that Sophie couldn't breach. Her own mother was shutting her out, and Sophie didn't know how to get her back. The strain between them only deepened as Clara's disease progressed. Sophie found herself taking on more responsibility, caring for the house, taking on extra duties at work, and looking after her mother's well-being. It wasn't that she minded, it was the way Clara withdrew into herself that hurt the most. Sophie had never felt so alone, not just physically but emotionally. Her mother was slipping away and Sophie felt powerless to stop it. Ben, Clara's husband, was equally affected, but in a different way. He had always been the practical one, the one who fixed problems, who kept things moving forward. But when Clara's diagnosis came, Ben felt completely helpless. He had always depended on Clara's strength, her ability to handle everything with grace and ease. Now, seeing her deteriorate both physically and emotionally, he didn't know what to do. He wanted to be there for her, wanted to offer comfort, but Clara's silence and refusal to acknowledge her illness made it almost impossible. Ben tried to approach her to offer support, but every time he did, Clara pulled away. The emotional distance between them grew, creating a chasm that neither of them knew how to cross. Ben had always been the provider, the protector. But Clara's illness was something beyond his control, beyond his ability to fix. And that was the hardest part for him to accept. One evening after dinner, Ben sat across from Clara, his face etched with concern. "Clara, I know you're struggling," he said gently. "But I'm here for you. I can't do this without you. I need you to let me in, to share what you're going through." Clara's gaze shifted to the floor, avoiding his eyes. "I can't, Ben. I don't want you to see me like this. I don't want to be weak. I don't want to admit that I'm not the person I used to be." Ben felt a pang of sadness, the words cutting through him. "You're not weak, Clara. You're still the same person. But you don't have to carry this alone. I'm here always. You don't have to hide from me." But Clara didn't respond. Instead, she retreated further into herself, leaving Ben to sit in silence, unsure of how to help the woman he loved. It was as though the disease had taken more than just Clara's health. It had taken their connection, their partnership. The emotional intimacy they had once shared was now a distant memory, replaced by the awkward silence that filled their home. Clara's relationship with her friends also suffered. Once the life of every gathering, Clara now avoided social events altogether. She stopped responding to texts, stopped answering the phone. Her friends, who had once admired her strength and grace, began to worry, but they didn't know how to reach her. They sent cards, left messages, but Clara kept her distance. She didn't want anyone to see the truth, not even her closest friends. Her best friend, Janet, finally confronted Clara during one of her rare visits. "Clara, we miss you. We're worried about you. Please let us in. You don't have to go through this alone." Clara, sitting on the couch, looked at Janet, her face pale and drawn. She could feel the weight of her friend's concern, but she didn't know how to respond. She didn't know how to let anyone in. It wasn't that she didn't want their help, it was that she couldn't bring herself to face the reality of what was happening to her. So she smiled weakly and said, "I'm fine. I'm just going through a tough time." But Janet wasn't convinced. She knew Clara well enough to see the pain behind the mask. Still, she left, unsure of how to break through the wall Clara had put up. And Clara was left alone again, with only her thoughts and her disease to keep her company. Clara's refusal to comb her hair became a symbol of everything she had lost: her strength, her confidence, and her connection to the people she loved. It was a silent rebellion, a way of expressing her fear, her anger, and her helplessness. But as the days passed, Clara realized that she could no longer live in isolation. She could no longer hide behind her disease, behind her untamed hair. She had to face the truth, not just for herself but for those who still cared. Clara had always prided herself on being composed, on managing the chaos of life with grace. She was the woman who could juggle 1,000 tasks at once and still come out looking flawless. But that version of Clara, the one who had everything under control, was now slipping away. Chronic myelogenous leukemia had taken more from her than just her health. It had taken her sense of peace, her confidence, and her ability to cope with the world around her. The symptoms of chronic myelogenous leukemia were insidious, creeping into Clara's life gradually, until they consumed her completely. At first, it was just the fatigue, a low-level exhaustion that made even the smallest tasks feel monumental. But soon, her physical health began to deteriorate in ways that were impossible to ignore. The pain in her joints intensified, leaving her unable to do the things she once loved, like gardening or walking to the park with Sophie and Thomas. Her energy drained away, leaving behind only a deep, constant weariness. But it wasn't just her body that was suffering. Clara's mind was beginning to crack under the weight of it all. The constant anxiety she felt was like a storm cloud hovering above her head, blocking out any sense of peace. She could no longer silence the voices in her head, the questions, the fears, the doubts that circled around her like vultures. Would she survive? How long did she have left? Would she be able to see her children grow up? The uncertainty of it all was suffocating, and Clara didn't know how to breathe through it. The anxiety wasn't just a passing feeling, it was a constant companion. Clara would wake up in the middle of the night, her heart racing, her breath shallow. She would lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, unable to silence the thoughts that filled her mind. Every day felt like a battle against her own body, against the disease that was slowly taking over her life. But it wasn't just the physical symptoms that wore her down, it was the mental toll of not knowing what the future would hold. The unknown was terrifying. During the day, Clara tried to keep up appearances. She smiled when Sophie came to check on her, put on a brave face when Ben asked how she was feeling, and tried to act like everything was normal. But behind the mask, she was falling apart. Her anxiety had become so overwhelming that it started to affect everything she did. She had trouble concentrating on simple tasks, forgetting things she would have never forgotten before. Conversations with her friends or family became a blur, and her once sharp memory now felt foggy and distant. But it wasn't just the physical symptoms and the constant anxiety that Clara was battling, it was the overwhelming sense of guilt that had taken root in her heart. Clara had always been the one who took care of others, the one who held everything together. But now, as she became more and more ill, she felt like she was failing the people who depended on her. She couldn't be the mother Sophie needed, the wife Ben deserved, or the friend who always knew how to offer support. The weight of that guilt pressed down on her, making it even harder to cope with her illness. She wasn't just battling cancer, she was battling the feeling that she was letting everyone down, that she was somehow failing at the one thing she had always done best: being strong. The guilt and anxiety were compounded by a deep sense of loneliness. Clara had always been surrounded by people, by her family, her friends, her community. But now, as she withdrew further into herself, she felt like an outsider in her own life. She had never been good at asking for help. She had always prided herself on being the one who could handle everything. But now, as she faced the reality of her disease, she found herself unable to ask for the help she needed. It wasn't just her illness that isolated her, it was the walls she had built around herself, the ones that kept people at a distance. She was afraid that if she let anyone in, they would see her as weak, as fragile, as someone who couldn't manage on her own. Her family, especially Sophie, tried to reach out. Sophie noticed the subtle changes in her mother, the way Clara flinched when Sophie touched her shoulder, the way her mother's eyes seemed vacant, distant. It wasn't just that Clara was physically sick, it was that she was emotionally distant, disconnected from everything she once loved. Sophie didn't know how to help, how to break through the walls her mother had built. Ben, too, had noticed the distance. He had always been the rock of their family, the one who took care of the practical things while Clara took care of the emotional and personal. But now, as Clara's illness took over, he didn't know how to support her. Every time he tried to ask how she was feeling, Clara would deflect, brushing him off with a weak smile or a vague answer. He could see that she was struggling, but he didn't know what to do to help her through it. The emotional distance between them was growing, and Ben didn't know how to fix it. He had always been able to solve problems, but this was one he couldn't solve. Clara had closed herself off and he couldn't reach her. Clara's friends too tried to reach out. Jessica, her hairdresser, had noticed the changes in Clara when she came in for her last appointment. Clara's hair had grown wild and untamed, a physical reflection of the chaos inside her. Jessica had asked Clara gently if she was okay. But Clara had smiled weakly and shrugged it off. "I'm fine," she had said. "Just tired." But Jessica knew better. She knew Clara well enough to see through the facade. "Clara," she said softly, "you don't have to do this alone. Whatever it is, we're here for you." Clara's heart broke at Jessica's words, but she didn't know how to let anyone in. She was afraid of being vulnerable, afraid of showing the cracks in her carefully constructed life. So she withdrew even further, keeping the world at arm's length, even as the weight of the disease and the anxiety consumed her. It wasn't until one night, lying awake in bed, unable to escape the storm of thoughts in her head, that Clara realized something important. She couldn't keep doing this alone. She couldn't keep pushing people away, couldn't keep hiding from the truth. The anxiety, the guilt, the fear, it was all too much. It wasn't just her disease that was killing her, it was her refusal to face it, her refusal to let others help. She had to let go. She had to trust, for the first time in her life, that it was okay to not have everything under control. Clara had always been someone who took pride in her appearance, especially her hair. It was one of the few things she felt she could control, the one part of her body that had always felt like hers. Her thick, dark brown locks had once been her pride, styled with care every morning before she started her day. But now, after months of neglect, her hair had become a reflection of the internal battle she could no longer hide. It had grown long, tangled, and unruly, just like the emotions she had been suppressing for so long. She knew it wasn't just about the hair. It was a symbol of everything she had been avoiding, her illness, her fears, and the emotional walls she had built around herself. But every time she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt overwhelmed by the sight. The woman staring back at her was a stranger, someone she didn't recognize. And as her disease progressed, Clara found herself avoiding mirrors altogether, not wanting to face the person she had become. Yet, despite her internal resistance, there was something about the idea of going back to her hairdresser, Jessica, that called to her. Jessica had been a fixture in Clara's life for years, a woman she trusted with her hair, someone who had seen her through both good times and bad. Clara remembered the days when she would sit in Jessica's chair, chatting about life, about family, about anything and everything. It was always a time of relaxation, a moment of self-care that Clara cherished. But now, with the disease and the changes in her life, Clara had stopped making appointments. She hadn't been to the salon in months. But today, as Clara sat at home, feeling the weight of her isolation pressing down on her, she made a decision. She was going to go to Jessica. Not because she cared about her appearance, but because she needed to reconnect with the woman she used to be, the woman who cared about herself. She needed to take that first step toward facing her fears and breaking down the walls she had built. Clara picked up the phone and dialed Jessica's number. Her heart raced as she waited for the line to connect. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but the sound of Jessica's familiar voice on the other end of the line brought a sense of comfort. "Clara, it's been so long. How are you?" Jessica asked warmly. Clara could hear the concern in her voice, and it made her feel both comforted and guilty. "I've been okay," Clara replied, her voice hesitant. "I know I haven't been in for a while, but I was wondering if I could come in for an appointment? I know it's been a long time." "Of course. I've missed seeing you." "It'll be good to have you back," Jessica responded, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure why she had avoided this for so long. Maybe it was fear of confronting the reality of her illness, fear of facing the person she had become. But now, as she made the decision to go, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She needed to face this. She needed to reconnect with the world, even if just for a moment. Later that afternoon, Clara arrived at the salon. The familiar sense of shampoo and hair products hit her as she walked through the door, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of normalcy. The bright lights, the sound of blow dryers, and the hum of conversation all reminded her of who she used to be, the woman who took care of herself, the woman who smiled in the mirror. But today, as she stood in front of the mirror in Jessica's salon, she was different. Her hair was a mess, unkempt and wild, tangled beyond repair. She felt embarrassed, almost ashamed of herself. Jessica greeted her with a warm hug. "Clara, it's so good to see you," she said with a genuine smile. I'm glad you came in. Clara smiled weakly, her heart pounding. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this, but I'm glad to be here. Jessica led Clara to the chair and began examining her hair. She ran her fingers through it gently, her touch soft and reassuring. Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax, if only for a moment. Clara, what's going on? Jessica asked softly, her voice filled with concern. I know you've been going through a lot, but this isn't just about your hair. I can see it in you. You're carrying something heavy, and I want you to know that you don't have to carry it alone. Clara opened her eyes, startled by Jessica's insight. She had never expected Jessica to notice the depth of her struggle. She had always been so careful to hide her pain, so careful to keep up the facade of being fine. But Jessica had seen right through it. I don't know how to talk about it, Clara whispered, her voice shaky. I've been hiding for so long, avoiding everything. It's hard to face what's happening to me. Jessica paused for a moment, her hands resting on Clara's shoulders. Clara, you don't have to face this alone. I'm here for you and I want to help however I can. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to ask for help. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had never been good at asking for help. She had always been the one who helped others, the one who took care of everything. But now, as Jessica spoke those words, Clara realized that she couldn't keep carrying the weight on her own. She couldn't keep hiding behind her disease, behind her uncombed hair, behind the walls she had built. I've been diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, Clara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. And I've been too scared to face it. I've been too scared to face myself. Jessica's expression softened, her eyes filled with empathy. Clara, I'm so sorry you're going through this. But you don't have to hide. You don't have to fight this alone. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Clara realized in that moment that she didn't have to hide anymore. She didn't have to be ashamed of her disease or the person she had become. She could face it. She could ask for help. And slowly, over time, she could begin to heal. As Jessica began to work on Clara's hair, carefully detangling the knots, Clara allowed herself to relax, to let go of the fear and anxiety that had plagued her for so long. She was starting a new chapter in her life, one where she didn't have to hide. And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt a glimmer of hope. Clara sat quietly in the salon chair, her mind racing as Jessica gently worked through the tangled mess of her hair. The soft hum of the blow dryer and the rhythmic snip of scissors were a welcome distraction from the storm of emotions inside her. 4 weeks now, she had avoided the truth, pushing it deep inside herself, too afraid to face it. But sitting there, with Jessica's comforting presence and her steady hands at work, Clara felt a small flicker of courage stirring within her. As Jessica continued, she broke the silence once more, her voice gentle but firm. Clara, I can see it in your eyes. I've known you for a long time, and something is weighing on you. You've been holding this all in for so long. You don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to carry this on your own. Clara swallowed hard, the words Jessica spoke striking a chord deep within her. She had been hiding from the truth for so long, too ashamed to acknowledge it, too afraid to admit how deeply it had affected her. But in that moment, with Jessica's steady gaze on her, Clara felt the last of her resistance crumble. I don't know if I can say it, Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. It's hard to put into words. Jessica nodded, her hands stilling for a moment as she gave Clara the space she needed. You don't have to say it all at once. Just take it one step at a time. Whatever you need to say, I'm here to listen. Clara took a shaky breath, closing her eyes for a moment. The lump in her throat felt unbearable, but she knew she had to say it. She couldn't keep carrying this secret, this burden, alone. Not anymore. I've been hiding something for a long time, Clara said quietly, her voice shaking. I was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia, CML. It's a type of blood cancer and I don't know how to deal with it. I'm terrified. I don't know how to face it, how to face the people I love, knowing that I might not be around for long. Jessica's expression softened, and she reached out to gently touch Clara's shoulder, her touch grounding and kind. Clara, I'm so sorry you've had to carry this burden alone. I can't even imagine what you've been through. But you don't have to hide it. You don't have to keep it all inside anymore. I'm here for you. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed by the sudden rush of emotion. I've been hiding from it, from everyone, because I didn't want them to see me like this. I didn't want anyone to pity me. I didn't want them to look at me and see the cancer, to see the weakness. I've always been the strong one, the one who takes care of everyone else. But now, I don't know how to take care of myself. I don't know how to ask for help. Jessica's hands paused and she gave Clara a moment to collect herself. Clara, you don't have to carry this alone. You don't have to be the strong one all the time. It's okay to lean on others. It's okay to ask for help. You're still the same person. You haven't lost your strength, you're just going through something difficult and it's okay to let people help you through it. Clara's breath caught as she heard Jessica's words. She had spent so long pretending to be fine, so long keeping up the facade of control, that she hadn't allowed herself to feel what she truly needed. The overwhelming grief, fear, and guilt had built up inside her, and now finally she was starting to release it. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to acknowledge the pain she had been burying for so long. I've been so scared, Jessica, Clara admitted, her voice breaking. Scared that I'm running out of time. Scared that I won't be there for my kids, that I won't get to see them grow up. And I'm scared that I won't be able to fix this, that I won't be able to get better. Jessica's expression softened even further, her voice full of empathy. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to not have all the answers. But you're not alone in this. You have people who care about you, who want to help you through this. You don't have to face it by yourself. And there are treatments, there are options. You're not without hope. You can still fight. The words hit Clara like a wave, washing over her with a mix of relief and sadness. She had been so consumed by her fear and guilt that she had stopped believing in the possibility of hope. She had thought that her disease had defined her, that it was all there was to her. But Jessica's words reminded her that she was still Clara Mitchell, the woman who had lived a full life, the woman who had loved and been loved, the woman who still had so much to offer the world. I've been so afraid of losing control, Clara said, her voice filled with the weight of years of suppressed emotions. But maybe that's what I need to do. I need to let go of trying to control everything, to let myself be vulnerable, to ask for help when I need it. I don't have to fight this alone. Jessica smiled, her expression gentle and understanding. You don't have to fight alone, Clara. And you don't have to carry the weight of this disease on your own. You have people who care about you, who are here for you. And you have the strength to face this, even if you don't feel it right now. Clara nodded, wiping away the last of her tears. She felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. She felt seen, understood, and supported in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be for so long. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crumble, and with that, the heavy weight of her guilt and fear began to lift. Jessica finished working on her hair, and Clara looked at her reflection in the mirror once more. It was still the same woman she had seen before, but now there was a difference. There was a softness in her eyes, a willingness to confront what lay ahead. For the first time in months, Clara felt like she was ready to face her disease, not with fear, but with the knowledge that she didn't have to do it alone. I'm ready, Clara said quietly, her voice filled with quiet determination. I'm ready to fight, to let go of the fear, and to face whatever comes next. Jessica smiled at her through the mirror, her expression filled with pride. I'm proud of you, Clara. You've taken the first step. And as Clara left the salon that day, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The road ahead would still be difficult, still filled with uncertainty and fear. But for the first time, Clara knew she wouldn't be facing it alone. Clara sat in her living room that evening, the soft hum of the house's quiet atmosphere surrounding her. The house that had once been filled with laughter, activity, and constant motion now felt strangely still. Clara was alone, but it wasn't just the physical silence that left her feeling empty. It was the weight of a secret she had been carrying for so long, a burden she had never shared with anyone. As she sat there, staring into the quiet darkness, Clara's mind drifted back to the time before everything changed. Before the diagnosis. Before her body had betrayed her. Back to the days when she was still able to pretend she was in control, when everything seemed to be falling into place. Clara's relationship with Lucy, her best friend of more than 20 years, had once been one of the cornerstones of her life. They had grown up together, sharing everything, dreams, fears, hopes, and even the small, silly moments that had made their friendship so special. They had been inseparable. Clara had always been the one who led the way, who had the plans, who kept things organized. And Lucy had always been there, the one who was spontaneous, who would go along with whatever Clara suggested. They balanced each other perfectly. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted. Clara didn't notice at first. It started with the small things. Lucy, once the quiet listener, began to make her own decisions without Clara's input. She started dating, first casually, then more seriously. And while Clara didn't mind at first, she had her own life to manage, there was one thing that began to stir something inside her. It wasn't just Lucy's increasing independence, it was the fact that Lucy had started dating Tom, the one person Clara had quietly admired for years. Tom had always been a gentle presence in Clara's life, a man she had known since childhood. He was kind, thoughtful, and above all caring. He made Clara laugh in a way no one else could, and over time, Clara had realized that she had developed feelings for him. It wasn't something she ever admitted even to herself, but the truth was she had fallen for Tom. But as Lucy and Tom began to spend more time together, those feelings became impossible to ignore. At first, Clara convinced herself that it was nothing, that it was just a passing attraction. But as their friendship with Tom deepened, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Lucy was taking away the one thing that mattered to her: Tom's attention, his time, and his affection. It hurt more than she cared to admit, but she pushed the pain aside. She couldn't let anyone know what she was feeling, especially not Lucy. So she buried it. The situation came to a head one fateful evening when Clara's feelings for Tom reached a breaking point. They were all sitting together in the living room, laughing and talking about some trivial matter, when Tom casually brushed Lucy's hand, and Clara felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it took her breath away. It was subtle, but it was there. And in that moment, something inside Clara snapped. "I'm tired of pretending, Lucy," Clara blurted out, the words spilling from her mouth before she could stop them. "I'm tired of pretending I'm okay with you and Tom. I can't keep lying about it. You've always taken everything I wanted, and now it's Tom. It feels like I'm invisible to both of you, like I don't matter at all." The words hung in the air, heavy with the truth they carried. Lucy's face went pale, and Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Clara, suddenly aware of what she had said, tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. Lucy's expression was a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "You've always been the one in control, Clara," Lucy said quietly, her voice trembling. "I never thought you'd see me as someone who was taking things from you. You don't have to fight me for his attention. You never have." Clara's heart sank as she watched Lucy's eyes fill with tears. She had never intended to hurt her, never wanted to destroy the friendship they had built for years. But in that moment, Clara had been consumed by her own jealousy, by the fear of losing something she had always taken for granted. And now there was no going back. The rift that formed between Clara and Lucy in that moment was unspoken but profound. Lucy withdrew, and Clara, feeling the weight of her actions, pulled away even further. She couldn't face her own guilt. She couldn't face the truth that she had hurt the one person who had always been there for her. She had been consumed by her own insecurities, by the fear of losing something she hadn't fully appreciated until it was too late. Over the next few months, Clara tried to reach out to Lucy to apologize for the words she had said, but Lucy was distant, unwilling to forgive so easily. Clara knew she had crossed a line, but the more she tried to fix it, the more Lucy pushed her away. The friendship that had once been her closest bond was now fractured, and Clara didn't know how to repair it. She felt as though she had lost a part of herself, the part of her that had known unconditional love and trust. The pain of losing Lucy, of losing that connection, weighed heavily on Clara. And as the months went on, it was as though the guilt festered inside her, a silent, ever-present companion. It wasn't just the words she had said, it was the fact that she had failed to acknowledge her own feelings and had let them destroy something that had meant so much to her. Clara's refusal to comb her hair, her withdrawal from her family and friends, all of it was a reflection of the deep, unresolved guilt she carried. The woman who had once been the picture of poise and grace had been reduced to someone she barely recognized. The woman who had always put others first, who had always cared for everyone else, was now the one who needed help, the one who couldn't figure out how to fix the damage she had caused. And yet, even as she sat in the salon chair, feeling the weight of her secrets, Clara knew something had to change. She couldn't keep running from her mistakes. She couldn't keep hiding from the truth. The healing process would be slow, but it had to start somewhere. And for Clara, it began with acknowledging her past, with confronting the guilt that had held her captive for so long. The days following Clara's confession to Jessica were a blur of conflicting emotions, relief mixed with guilt, sadness interwoven with moments of hope. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara allowed herself to feel. She wasn't hiding behind her illness anymore. She wasn't pretending to be someone she wasn't. And while it felt terrifying, there was also a quiet strength in her vulnerability. But the real change came when Clara started to make active decisions about how she wanted to move forward. For so long, she had let fear guide her actions. Fear of the disease, fear of her own emotions, fear of facing what she had been avoiding. But now, as she looked at herself in the mirror, she realized that fear was no longer going to control her. It was time to take back the pieces of her life that she could still control. The first step was accepting the help that had been offered to her for so long. Sophie had always been there, watching her mother's slow descent into isolation, and now she was ready to step in. After the conversation with Jessica, Clara called Sophie. The decision to reach out felt like a massive leap, a giant step away from the walls she had built around herself. "Sophie," Clara began, her voice uncertain but filled with a quiet determination, "I think I need help. I can't do this alone anymore." Sophie, who had been waiting for this moment for months, responded immediately. "Mom, I'm here for you. Whatever you need, we can do this together." Clara's heart swelled with emotion. She had expected Sophie to say something kind to comfort her, but hearing the genuine promise of support brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't just the words, it was the realization that Sophie hadn't given up on her, even when Clara had given up on herself. They spent the next few days together working on ways Clara could start feeling more like herself again. Sophie took the lead in organizing things. She helped Clara re-establish a routine, something that had once come naturally to Clara but now felt like a distant memory. It wasn't easy, but little by little, Clara started to see glimmers of hope in the mundane. They started walking together every morning, slowly building up her stamina and finding comfort in the simplicity of shared time. For Clara, it was more than just physical activity, it was about reconnecting with the world, with her body, and most importantly, with herself. One morning as they walked through the park near their house, Clara felt the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. It was the first time in weeks she had felt truly present. It wasn't about the disease, the pain, or the fear, it was about being alive. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to experience the moment without guilt, without worrying about what might come next. Sophie smiled at her mother, noticing the change in her demeanor. "You're doing great, Mom. I'm so proud of you." Clara smiled back, a genuine smile this time, one that reached her eyes. "I'm not there yet, Sophie. I'm still scared. But I'm trying. And I'm doing this with you." It was the first step in a new chapter of Clara's life, one where fear no longer ruled. Every day, Clara was taking more steps toward healing. But it wasn't just the physical recovery that mattered. It was the emotional healing that Clara had neglected for so long. The walls she had built around herself, the isolation she had embraced, were now slowly crumbling. Clara knew that this journey would not be without setbacks. There would still be days when the weight of the disease and the guilt of the past would feel too heavy to carry. But now she understood that she didn't have to carry it alone. She had Sophie, Ben, and even her friends who were beginning to reach out again. The process of rebuilding those relationships, of mending the fractures that had formed over the past year, would take time. But Clara was ready for it. She was finally ready to face her fears head-on, to ask for help when she needed it, and to stop running from the reality of her illness. Her relationship with Ben also began to shift. For the first time in months, Clara was able to sit down with him and have an honest conversation about her fears and her needs. She explained the guilt she felt for not being the wife and mother she had once been, for not being the strong woman he had relied on. Ben listened carefully, his eyes filled with understanding, and he assured Clara that it was okay, that they were in this together and they would face whatever came next as a team. "I don't need you to be perfect, Clara," Ben said one evening, his voice soft but firm. "I just need you to be here, to be honest with me. I'm here for you no matter what." Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. For so long she had believed that she had to be perfect, that she had to have all the answers. But Ben had shown her that it was okay to be vulnerable, that it was okay to admit that she didn't have all the answers. Their relationship, though strained, was now based on a deeper understanding. They were both learning to navigate this new reality together. But the most significant turning point came when Clara finally made the decision to seek treatment for her illness. She had been avoiding it for so long, terrified of what the future might hold. But now, with the support of her family and friends, she was ready to face it. She scheduled her first round of treatments, knowing that it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, Clara felt like she was taking control of her life again, not by fighting the disease, but by accepting help and facing it head-on. As Clara sat in her doctor's office, signing the paperwork for her treatment plan, she realized that this was the beginning of something new. It wasn't just about surviving cancer. It was about living, truly living with the people she loved, with the understanding that healing wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was about letting go of the fear, letting go of the guilt, and finding the strength to move forward. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with obstacles and challenges. But Clara knew that with each step she was reclaiming her life, and in doing so she was beginning to heal, not just her body but her soul. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt hopeful about the future. Clara woke up that morning feeling something she hadn't felt in months: hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from grand gestures or fleeting moments of optimism. It was quieter, more rooted, like the first glimpse of spring after a long, harsh winter. The days ahead were still uncertain, the weight of her chronic myelogenous leukemia still present, but for the first time, Clara felt a sense of agency in her life. She was no longer merely surviving, she was beginning to live again. The decision to seek treatment had been a pivotal one, but it wasn't just the treatments themselves that marked the turning point. It was the internal shift, the choice Clara made to face the disease head-on, to stop hiding from it. The first day of treatment had been emotionally and physically exhausting, but it also filled Clara with a sense of accomplishment. She had done something she hadn't thought possible just a few weeks ago. She had taken control. Her family noticed the change almost immediately. Ben, who had been so uncertain about how to support Clara during the worst of it, now saw a woman who was actively fighting, not just against chronic myelogenous leukemia, but against the fear that had gripped her for so long. Sophie, too, began to see a subtle transformation in her mother. It wasn't just the way Clara looked, it was the way she carried herself, the way she spoke about the future. There was still pain, still moments of doubt, but there was also a sense of determination, of quiet strength that Sophie hadn't seen in a long time. Clara's decision to seek treatment also meant opening up more to her support system. She began to lean on Ben and Sophie more than she ever had before. She let them attend her doctor's appointments with her, allowed them to be a part of the process, something she had previously shut them out of. The support of her family, as difficult as it had been to accept, became a cornerstone of her healing. As Clara continued her treatments, she found herself rediscovering parts of herself she thought had been lost. She began taking small steps toward reclaiming the woman she had been before the diagnosis. She resumed some of her favorite activities, things she hadn't had the energy for in months. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult treatment, Clara found herself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a homemade soup. The rhythmic motion of slicing and dicing was soothing, grounding her in the present. It wasn't just about feeding her body, it was about feeding her soul. Cooking had always been a form of therapy for Clara. It was a creative outlet, a way to express herself, and a way to nourish her family. She had stopped cooking during the worst of her illness, feeling too fatigued and overwhelmed to even consider it. But now, with each meal she prepared, Clara felt a sense of accomplishment, of normalcy returning to her life. The act of cooking was symbolic of the internal shift she was experiencing. It wasn't about perfection, it was about reconnecting with herself, with the things that made her feel whole. The walks with Sophie, once a reluctant chore, had also become a cherished part of Clara's routine. She found herself looking forward to the quiet mornings spent walking through the park, the fresh air filling her lungs, the sound of birds chirping in the trees. These walks were more than just physical exercise, they were a way for Clara to reconnect with her daughter, to rebuild the bond that had weakened during her isolation. Sophie had always been her greatest support, but now, as they walked together side by side, Clara realized how much her daughter had grown, how much strength Sophie had shown in the face of Clara's illness. It was a reminder that they were in this together, that they were a team. Ben too noticed the change. Clara had always been the one to take care of everything, but now, as she focused on her own healing, she allowed him to step in more, to support her in ways he hadn't before. Their relationship had been strained, but now, there was a sense of mutual respect and understanding between them. Ben had always been the practical one, the one who provided, who fixed things. But now he was learning to be more emotionally available, to be present in a way he hadn't been before. He wasn't just Clara's caretaker, he was her partner, her equal. And that realization, that shift in their dynamic, brought them closer than ever before. Clara's friends also began to reach out more. Jessica, her hairdresser, had been one of the first to notice the changes in Clara, and she continued to offer her support. Clara had been avoiding social interactions for so long, but now as she began to heal, she felt the urge to reconnect. She met with Jessica for coffee one afternoon, and the conversation was easy, effortless, as it had always been. It wasn't just about her illness, it was about reconnecting, about rediscovering the joy in everyday moments. Jessica was the first person outside of her family to really understand what Clara was going through, and Clara appreciated her presence more than she could put into words. But the most profound change came from within Clara herself. For the first time, she realized that healing wasn't just about physical recovery, it was about emotional recovery as well. She had spent so much time focusing on her illness, on the things that were out of her control, that she had neglected the emotional and mental aspects of healing. The therapy she had started attending had helped, but it wasn't until she allowed herself to truly feel anger, sadness, hope, that the healing process became more than just a fight against disease. It became a fight for her life, for the relationships she cherished, for the woman she still was. One evening, after a long day of treatment and family time, Clara sat alone on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was a soft pink, the air cool against her skin, and for the first time in months she felt at peace. The anxiety that had plagued her for so long was still there, lingering in the background, but it no longer controlled her. She had taken the first steps toward reclaiming her life, and with each step she felt herself becoming stronger, more resilient. She still had a long way to go. There were moments when the fear would creep in, when the unknown would seem insurmountable. But Clara now understood that healing wasn't about erasing the disease or the fear. It was about embracing both, about learning to live with them, not in spite of them. She was no longer afraid of her future. She was ready to face it, to fight for the life she still had, and to love herself through the process. As Clara sat there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she realized that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but she was no longer afraid to walk it. As Clara's healing journey continued, those around her, family, friends, even acquaintances, began to notice the change. It was subtle at first, a small shift in the way she held herself, in the way her eyes seemed to regain some of their old spark. But as the days passed, the change became undeniable. The woman who had once been withdrawn, consumed by fear and uncertainty, was slowly emerging from the shadows. The transformation was not just physical, it was emotional, psychological, and most importantly, it was real. Sophie, who had been the first to notice her mother's struggles, saw this change more clearly than anyone. For months, Clara had been a ghost in their home, her presence barely felt, her smile faint and hollow. But now, as the days passed, Clara seemed more like herself. She was no longer hiding from Sophie, no longer pushing her away. There were still difficult moments, days when the weight of the illness was too much to bear, but for the first time in a long time, Sophie could see the woman she had always admired, the strong, loving, selfless woman who had once been her rock. One afternoon, after a quiet lunch together, Sophie looked at Clara, her heart full of gratitude. "Mom," she said softly, her voice laced with emotion, "I see you. I see the real you again. And I'm so proud of you." Clara smiled, a smile that was genuine, warm, and filled with the love she had thought she had lost. "Thank you, Sophie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you. You've been my strength when I couldn't find any of my own." Sophie's eyes softened, and she reached out to take Clara's hand. "We've always been in this together, Mom. I'm just glad you're letting me help you now." The words, simple as they were, meant more to Clara than she could ever express. For the first time in months, she felt truly seen by her daughter, truly understood. She hadn't realized how much she had been pushing Sophie away until now, and the realization brought tears to her eyes. But in that moment, she also realized that healing wasn't just about her. It was about reconnecting with those she loved, about building those bridges that had once felt so distant. Ben too noticed the change. The emotional distance that had separated him and Clara for so long was beginning to close. For months, they had been trapped in a silent standoff, each unsure of how to reach the other, each struggling with their own fears and insecurities. Ben had felt helpless, unsure of how to support Clara as she withdrew from him and from everyone else. But now, as Clara began to open up, he felt the walls between them beginning to crumble. One evening, after a long day, Clara and Ben sat on the couch together, the silence between them more comfortable than it had been in months. Clara had been talking about her treatment, about how the medication was starting to work, and about the small victories she had been experiencing. Ben listened intently, but there was something different in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. It was as if, for the first time, he was truly seeing her, not as the woman struggling with illness, but as Clara, the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "You know," Ben said softly, his voice breaking the silence, "I'm really proud of you. I don't know if I ever told you that, but I am. You've been so strong through all of this, and I've just been sitting on the sidelines not knowing how to help. I should have done more." Clara reached out and touched his hand, her fingers gently brushing against his. "Ben, I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have let you in sooner. I should have told you what I was going through. I was so afraid of being weak, of losing control, that I pushed you away. But I'm ready now. I'm ready to face this, and I need you by my side." Ben nodded, his eyes filled with both relief and regret. "I'm here, Clara. I always have been. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in what felt like forever, Clara felt the warmth of Ben's presence beside her. It wasn't that their marriage had been broken, but it had been strained, stretched thin by her refusal to face her illness and by the emotional distance that had grown between them. But now, as they sat together, Clara felt like they were starting fresh. They were no longer two people trying to survive the storm separately, they were facing it together. It wasn't just her immediate family that had noticed the change in Clara. Her friends too were starting to see her come back to life. Jessica, the hairdresser who had first recognized Clara's struggle, was one of the first to reach out after Clara began to make progress in her recovery. They had shared a bond that went beyond the salon chair, and Jessica had been there for Clara when no one else had noticed the depth of her pain. So when Clara walked back into the salon, her hair freshly styled, her demeanor lighter, Jessica was there to greet her with open arms. "You look amazing," Jessica said, her voice filled with admiration. "I can see it, Clara. You're back." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. "It's a work in progress," she replied, her voice tinged with humor. "But I'm getting there." Jessica laughed softly, her eyes bright with pride. "I'm so proud of you. You've come a long way." Clara's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jessica. You were there for me when I needed someone to talk to. I can't tell you how much that meant to me." Jessica placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. "You don't have to thank me. We're friends and that's what friends do. You've always had it in you, Clara. I'm just glad to see you remembering that." Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it was a tear of relief, of hope. For the first time in a long time, Clara realized that her journey wasn't just about the physical battle against cancer. It was about rebuilding the relationships that had sustained her for so many years. It was about showing up for the people who had always shown up for her, about being vulnerable enough to accept their love and support. The change in Clara wasn't just about the treatments or the physical recovery, it was about opening herself up to the love and care of those around her. It was about understanding that healing didn't happen in isolation. It happened in connection, in community, in the relationships that grounded her. As Clara looked around her, at the people who had supported her, she realized that this was the beginning of something beautiful. Her family, her friends, they were there for her. And for the first time in months, Clara felt like she could face whatever came next, not alone, but with the people she loved by her side.